Welcome back to Excel Physical Therapy for Transition Back into Running Episode 4. I'm AJ Sabrilski, Physical Therapist at Excel.
I'm Jason London.
And as always,
we are 6 feet apart.
So over the first 3 episodes, we've really talked about kind of building up the capacity and making sure we don't go over the capacity of our bodies in terms of running injuries, because that's what will lead to that reactive response. One of those big ways here is that load management. So again, not exceeding the capacity of our tissues or our bodies, and then thus having an injury. We've also talked about mobility, and specifically the hip extension, ankle dorsiflexion, and first toe extension, and also how you don't really need to have a ton of mobility and be super flexible, but just enough to get that leg behind us. In our last episode, we talked a lot about that skill of running, or how to work that push, that drive, that specific form and that lean to be able to utilize that hip extension and all those mobility drills we worked on. And today we're going to talk about some strength stuff, as well as some particular aspects of recovery to make sure that we also avoid that prolonged fatigue and all that delayed onset and all the soreness that we might be dealing with as we go through this progression in performance training. So that idea of that perfect form, again, those 3 big things, that hip extension, that ankle dorsiflexion, that first toe extension, are those key aspects to get our leg behind us, which allows us then to have that pendulum-like arc swing, so we're equal in front and equal in back. And in order to maintain that and get that leg behind us and utilize all that drive, we want to make sure we have a control at our trunk, stability here, the ability to develop a lot of force through our leg without compensating at our back. And what we're going to transition into a little talk here coming up is that adequate tendon strength and then strength and power. Again, if we think of our muscles and tendons like springs or rubber bands, they're consistently absorbing energy and then releasing it. And we want to make sure they're primed and have the optimal integrity to do that. And that's what we're going to talk training for that right now. And here we have actually Matt from Uphill Pursuit demonstrating some great uphill running form. I don't know if you can see, but he's got that great hip extension. He's not arching at his back. Good ankle dorsiflexion, and I'm sure his toes are going through a whole lot of extension as he's trekking up that hill there. Not too sure about the form on the poles. That's something we might have to have another episode on in the future. So, can't go wrong getting strong. Jason and I here, a picture from this morning of us after we got done working out. Kind of calmed down a little bit since then.
Tandem deadlifts, they're fun.
But some of the big goals we're looking for strength training are to improve our injury resilience. So kind of building that armor of strength. Again, if our muscles are stronger, they can perform longer, they can tolerate a little bit of that progressive capacity and loading. One of the other big components of strength training is adapting neurally. Now, when we strength train for runners, we'll talk about here a little bit more, is making sure that the reps adequately stimulate our nervous system to recruit more muscle fibers and recruit them quicker and recruit them faster. There's this big concern about bulking up for runners and how that will diminish it. But if we do that properly, usually keeping the reps low, so 1 to 6 reps and the sets usually between 3 and 5, we can avoid that bulking or that getting bigger and putting on a lot of muscle mass. And one of the big aspects of strength training is improving the rate of force development. Now, each step we place on the ground is somewhere between 0.2 seconds and 0.4 seconds. And if we want to go faster, we've got to be able to recruit and rely on that strength to push quicker and be able to turn it on really, really fast. So some of the key lifts for runners here are the big posterior chain muscles, the glutes, the hamstrings, some of the quads for sure, and ones we forget about a lot are the calf raises, so the soleus and the gastroc. And a lot of people will do repeated calf raises with body weight stuff, but what we want to remember is if we want to improve capacity and build muscle tolerance up, we need to really weight and challenge these muscles. So again, it's not doing 30, 40, 50 body weight squats or deadlifts or calf raises, which in a rehab phase might be the appropriate thing, but ultimately to improve our capacity, improve our loading tolerance, and be able to develop a bigger cup and a bigger engine, we need to weight this so our body can tolerate and adapt to this. And a lot of people aren't familiar with these key lifts. They're big, kind of scary lifts. They require a lot of equipment, and the training principles behind it can be tricky. But here in town, we have a great resource. The Mountain Project, Mike Wolf and Emily Kipp and them down there do a really good job of developing this kind of system and making sure that people are doing the form right, working into that. So if you're not familiar with it and you don't have the equipment available right away, again, working the simple form drills at home are great, but ultimately loading it up and progressing that is pretty essential to developing, again, a little injury resilience and also some performance aspects. And I think the Mountain Project is a great place to transition into that and try that. They have some good programs down there for that as well. But it's not also just about pure strength. Being able to lift a lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times is not as crucial in running as it is to have that strength and to be able to develop it really, really fast. So something in running we talk a lot about is the rate of force development. It's how quickly can you apply that force to the ground to go forward. So, and there's 2 key components of strength training or the development of this that are essential in utilizing that strength. One of them is power, so an explosive movement. Kind of like a really high box jump or a standing lunge jump or a standing bound. It's about that one quick, big amount of force developed at one time. The other component of that would be a plyometric, and that's more so about how quick you can get off the ground. And the combination of that power and that plyometrics with an improvement in strength is where we start to see that ability of our stride to produce more force with that extension behind us to go forward a lot faster. And with all that strength training and the power of the plyometrics, we have a lot of different stress on our body. And one of the big components to making sure that that stress becomes an essential component and a piece that we can use in our running is recovering properly. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason here to talk a lot about that recovery coming up.
All right. So, we're trying to build performance, build resiliency with strength training, with ramping up our volume gradually. But at a certain point, our capacity is going to decrease and we are going to hit fatigue. So if we're doing back-to-back days, we're not allowing for recovery and that fatigue is going to creep in. And it's been shown over many studies that fatigue does alter running mechanics and it alters them in a way that we're not really wanting to be. So it increases impact, changes basically how your hip is moving, and then ends up stressing tissues that maybe aren't used to being stressed if you're running fatigued, and then that can lead to increased risk of injury. And so what we need to do is we need to allow for recovery. So the old maxim goes is you're breaking down muscles in the gym and you're building them in bed. So we're breaking down muscles on the trail, but we need to build them on our rest days. So going back to the first episode is we need at least 2 rest days a week from running. So that doesn't mean, again, you need to be a couch potato, but you're doing active rest on those days. And other ways to restore capacity is making sure that you're adequately hydrated and that you rehydrate adequately after training, and that just as importantly is you're refueling after training so that you give your body those building blocks that it needs to build that muscle and bone and other tissue back up and build that resiliency into the system. Doing proper self-care, such as foam rolling or yoga practice is really important, and we'll see why here in a few slides. And then perhaps kind of the biggest area of research that's really seems to be expanding is the importance of sleep, and so we'll end with that. So hydration. So just even mild amounts of dehydration can really impact your performance as well as increase your risk for injury. So mild amounts of dehydration cause reduced endurance, reduced thermal regulatory capacity, so basically your body's ability to handle heat or cold, as well as allow for fatigue to creep in more quickly. So it's really important to be hydrated at the start of your training, and then making sure to hydrate after your training as well. So if you do get dehydrated, it takes 24 hours to recover from that. And so we're trying to avoid getting there in the first place. So we need 3 to 4 liters per day. I think everyone has a little bit of a different need in terms of how much water. My wife, for example, is pounding Nalgene's all day long, where I'm not drinking as much there. And then while you're training, really making sure that you're just drinking to thirst during training, not necessarily trying to really overhydrate, which can be another problem for really long endurance events. And then after you're done training, getting 16 to 24 ounces for every pound that you've lost due to sweat during training. So one way to do that is you measure yourself before you go for your run, particularly if it's a longer run, and then you come back and you measure yourself afterwards. Typically you are going to see a decrease in weight, and then you want to restore that weight that's lost because it's hydration that's lost. And if you're training for over an hour drinking something with electrolytes as well. Now, beer is not necessarily the best rehydrating thing unless it's under 4%. And unfortunately, Pabst is 4.6%. So really you're going to need to find some 3-2 beer, which I think my home state of Minnesota is the only state in the nation now that continues to carry 3-2 beer. So in general, it's best to use good old H2O for hydration. So in addition to remaining hydrated, it's really important to refuel after training, and really maximize the benefit of training is refueling within the first 60 minutes after training, and eating a snack or a meal that is that has components of carbohydrates, healthy fats, and protein. So typically for endurance sports, you want 55% of that meal to be carbohydrates, 25% to be healthy fats, and 20% to be protein. So a good example of that is, my standard is peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of milk after training. So having some combination of carbs, fats, and protein. And then also, while just with your general diet, it's really important to make sure you're getting adequate calcium and iron. So for men, that's about 1,000 milligrams per day of calcium, and for women, it's a little bit higher, 1,200. And then for iron, it's anywhere between 8 and 18 milligrams of iron that you need to get. So looking at ways to get that into your diet, ideally in whole foods, but if you can't get that with the foods that you're eating, supplementing that as well. So a good resource for ideas of what good sources of calcium and iron are, particularly if you don't eat dairy or meat, is through the USOC, through teamusa.org/nutrition, there in the bottom left-hand corner. And then also making sure that you're really continuing to refuel every few hours after your training to really enhance the training effect. So, eating, nuts and again, some carbohydrates for small snacks throughout the day is really going to help your body's capacity to recover and build more resiliency than you began with at the start of training. And then for self-care is really just taking care of your body and doing some things to, again, speed recovery. Foam rolling is a great example here. It can be a good form of self-torture, but it really does help aid in preventing delayed onset muscle soreness and speed recovery in the fact that it actually increases blood flow to those muscles that you're rolling for up to a couple hours after you've done your foam rolling. So basically it's like a self-flush. Massage does the same thing. We have great massage therapists here at Excel Physical Therapy, or if you have a massage therapist in town, hit them up, particularly on those bigger training weeks, and they will really help you with aiding in recovery. And then lastly, there's a massage picture. And then lastly, yoga really has been shown to decrease systemic inflammation. So it can, daily yoga practice can decrease basically the amount of inflammation that's in your body, as well as help you with that mobility that we talked about a couple episodes ago. And so if you're not familiar with yoga, a great way to get into it is going to a yoga class. Those aren't open right now, but a great resource is our friends over at Spire are doing free online yoga classes during this time, so hit them up. They have some live classes that you can drop into, otherwise they're pre-recording those as well. And when we're talking about rest, what's going to be the most important thing is sleep. So this is a great quote here from Matthew Walker, who's a neuroscientist and the director and founder of the Center for Sleep Study. Sleep is the greatest performance-enhancing drug no one is using. So there's been studies showing even mild amounts of sleep deprivation, so even just one night of a partial sleep deprivation, really decrease performance on different athletic tasks. And then there's a new study, kind of hot off of the press from this past March, that showed those endurance athletes that were getting less than 7 hours per night of sleep were more likely to become injured with an increased risk of about 36%. And those athletes that were getting more than 7 hours per night per sleep had a decreased risk of injury by about 50%. And there's about a 2-week lag there in terms of when that injury is cropping up. So, making sure not to just try to get sleep before a big event or the days leading up to that, but you're thinking about getting good quality sleep every single night during your whole training and, in general, just for the whole year. So what is good, healthy sleep? Well, quality sleep is that you fall asleep within the first 30 minutes of going to bed, and that you sleep through the night with maybe waking once, and you wake up feeling rested. And I think a lot of us, that's not the case. And for adults, we really need to be getting 7 hours or more per night of sleep, ideally closer to 8 to 9 hours. And to make sure we're getting good sleep and good quality sleep, it's really important to set a consistent bedtime and wake time for pretty much every day of the week. And if you know that your schedule is going to change, try to gradually incorporate that change by just changing your bedtime and wake time by about 15 minutes. Also, for making sure that you're going to get good quality sleep, avoid beer or alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, for several hours before going to bed. And then also really important to avoid screens for about an hour before going to bed. So that includes your cell phone, your tablet, and TV as well, as blue light seems to really negatively affect our ability to get quality sleep. And then for those who are really struggling with getting quality sleep, there are resources out there in terms of getting a sleep study and talking to a physician who specializes in sleep. But yeah, sleep is really important, not for just decreasing our risk of injury, but really for increasing our performance as well. So today we talked about, trying to really build our capacity, build our resiliency through some strength training, and then also continue to build back up that capacity and resiliency through adequate recovery. Next episode is going to be on Monday, May 11th, and it's going to be live. And we're just going to be mainly doing question and answer with probably doing a quick review at the beginning. So tune in for that Monday, May 11th on the Uphill Pursuits Instagram page, 6 to 7:30 p.m. As always, we're putting out tips every week on basically running injuries and their prevention, as well as other orthopedic topics, including climbing injuries on our Instagram page and Facebook page at Excel. And then if you guys have any questions, either write them in the comments below or send either myself or AJ an email with our emails addressed there. Have a great week and happy running.